Welcome back. In my YouTube videos, I normally use a different color background depending on what I'm talking about in the thumbnail. Now in the thumbnail, if it has a blue background, it's normally about photography and videography, the basics on what you need to do to get your imagery. If it has an orange background, it's normally a product review. And I try to do this on purpose to kind of categorize things. Then I also have a green background, and the green background is normally how to flip gear, or what you need to know when flipping gear. This one I'm probably going to put it with a green background, the thumbnail, because when it comes to scratches on your lens, most of the time, really, the only thing it really affects is resale value. So let's find out more about why, and let's get to it. Now, when we're talking about flipping gear, and we're talking about scratches, it definitely affects the value of the lens. People who are wanting a lens, they're wanting it as pristine as possible and as clean as possible. If you have fungus, if you have dust in the lens, it's going to affect the value of that lens. If you have a tiny scratch or scratches on the lens, it's going to affect the value of that lens when you decide to put it up for sale or you're flipping it. So take that in consideration when you go look at a lens that someone has for sale. If it's perfectly clean on the exterior lens, and more importantly, the rear lens has to be pristine. You don't want to get anything that has any kind of dust or any kind of mildew or moisture in the lens unless you're purchasing it under those conditions. And under those conditions, it greatly devalues the price of the lens. So I wouldn't recommend picking up gear that has those type of problems. It's just really not worth it unless you're getting it for pennies on the dollar, but they're even difficult to sell because people want glass in extremely good shape. Why would you even purchase a lens with a scratch in it? Well, for one thing, as we've talked in the previous part of the video, the price of the lens goes down considerably if it has an imperfection in it. So you can pick up a really nice lens, a good piece of glass, just because it has a slight imperfection, and that does affect the value of the lens. It may not affect the imagery in any way, shape, or form. If it's an exterior scratch or a little speck or something wrong with the exterior of the lens, for all practical purposes, you probably will not even notice it in your imagery. There's YouTube videos where people have scratched up the lens, and if you're doing inside shooting, it may soften the image a little bit. And in reality, sometimes you put a filter on if you're shooting videography to soften everything, because you don't want the extreme sharp edges of things. You may have actors and they're in conversation with either or anything. You may not want that vividly sharp edge, so you put on a lens filter so that you don't have to do this in post. That will soften everything, and basically that lens filter is like a camera lens that has been purposely scratched up to soften the image. Now outside, if there's a scratch in the lens, there is a possibility that you'll get what's called lens flare. The light will catch it on a specific angle and flare. It can give you a halo effect or a flare effect. And sometimes in videography, you put a lens on to do that too. If you've seen any of the Star Treks that have Chris Pine in there, they put so much lens flare in the imagery, it kind of almost gets on your nerves because it's just all over the place. It's, in my opinion, a little too much, but there you go. So, outside there is a possibility of picking up a lens flare because of that, which may or may not make your shot. It may actually make it. It may be in a specific spot where it looks great. But in reality, if there's a tiny little speck, a very light scratch in the lens, the odds of you seeing it in your imagery is really slim. Does affect the resale value because people don't want to see that. But as far as a scratch on the exterior, it takes a lot before it affects the imagery. You have to understand this thing's not focusing at the back end of this lens. The focus point is way out, so it's going past that imperfection. Anything on the back. If there is anything wrong with this back lens, that's very close to the sensor. You're going to see it. If it's dust or mildew or fungus or anything, a scratch, it's definitely going to affect the imagery. But on the exterior of the lens, in most circumstances, you're not going to see it. Nobody likes to scratch their lens. If you're out doing something and you don't have it protected in any way, or you're shooting on the side of some rocks and you accidentally bump it into the rocks and damage the lens, it is heartbreaking. You don't want to purposely have that happen. But in reality, if you want to pick up some inexpensive gear and get great photography, still your imagery look really good, go ahead and pick up a less expensive one because it has a small imperfection in it. And I think you'll be really pleased. You got a good deal, and for all practical purposes, you're not going to notice it. As a matter of fact, check out this lens. I've had this lens for a long time, and just recently have decided to put it up for sale, and just recently noticed it has a teeny tiny speck on the exterior of the lens. Now, when I put the ad out, I purposely showed that little tiny speck, and it took a while before I could get it on a specific angle to show it. I didn't initially see it. I was cleaning the lens and I thought everything was fine, and just happened to catch the light in this little speck. I got to thank Ben Lister for that, because he asked me when he was looking at purchasing that lens about, is there anything wrong with the lens? Is there anything? And I examined it and then found that there is a tiny, tiny imperfection. You're never going to see it in your imagery, really. The odds are completely against you'll ever see that. Is there a specific time where maybe outside the sun catches that little tiny speck and maybe makes a flare? I can't say that won't happen, because there is a teeny tiny imperfection. I didn't change the price of the lens for an imperfection that small. It was just, it's nothing. So, you know, nobody likes the scratches. But if you do have a scratch in it, it does affect the resale value, and you have to take that in consideration. If you are purchasing it to flip, to resell, get the glasses in extreme condition as you can. Get it as best as you can. Pristine is a better word, because people will examine it when you're showing it to them. And if there is a scratch and you've told them about the scratch, that's an okay thing, because they've been forewarned and they realize that they're getting the lens at a discounted price because of that small imperfection. Well, thanks for stopping by and watching this video. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. I love people's suggestions, like what Ben did, so that I knew to make a video on this topic. Once again, subscribe. I would really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.